Have you ever given an ex a second chance? I never imagined I'd be someone who gave an ex a second chance, let alone married one. The first time we were together, everything felt intense, but unstable. She had deep trust issues from past relationships. I, on the other hand, was arrogant enough to believe that trust was something you could simply demand and receive in full. I thought love meant certainty. She thought love meant caution. Neither of us knew how to bridge that gap. Every disagreement eventually circled back to the same place. I felt monitored. She felt unsafe. I took her doubts personally, as if they were accusations. She took my confidence as emotional recklessness. Instead of slowing down and listening, I pushed harder. I wanted reassurance without understanding the fear behind it. Eventually, the relationship collapsed under its own weight. There was no dramatic betrayal, no explosive ending, just exhaustion. Two people who cared about each other but couldn't meet in the middle. When it ended, I remember thinking that timing had ruined something that might have worked under different circumstances. Then 10 years passed. A full decade of separate lives. Different careers. Different priorities. Different scars. I changed more than I expected to. Life humbled me. I learned patience the hard way. I learned that trust isn't a demand, it's a process. When we reconnected, it wasn't romantic at first. It was cautious, honest, almost awkward. There were no grand declarations, no rushing back into old patterns. We talked like adults who had already seen how badly things can go when ego leads the way. This time, I didn't ask for total trust. I focused on being trustworthy. And she didn't test me the way she used to. She had done her own work too. She understood her fears better. She communicated instead of retreating. The second version of us was quieter, slower, but infinitely stronger. We paid attention to the mistakes we'd made before. When familiar tensions appeared, we didn't ignore them or pretend we were different people. We addressed them directly, without blame. That made all the difference. We've been married for 15 years now. No fairy tale perfection. No constant passion. Just consistency. Mutual respect. The kind of relationship that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. Giving an ex a second chance doesn't work because of nostalgia. It works only when both people are no longer who they used to be. Sometimes the relationship didn't fail, the timing did. And sometimes, when you meet again with humility instead of pride, the second chance isn't a risk. It's a correction. Yes, I've been there. And for a while, it felt like it worked. After we got back together, everything was good for a couple of months. Not because we had suddenly grown or fixed anything, but because we were both trying hard to avoid the topics that had broken us the first time. We were careful, polite, almost rehearsed in how we interacted with each other. It felt lighter at first. We focused on the parts of the relationship that still worked, the chemistry, the familiarity, the comfort of knowing someone so well. We went on dates, laughed more, and told ourselves that this time would be different because we wanted it to be. But wanting something doesn't automatically change it. Slowly, the old issues started creeping back in. The same disagreements, just worded more carefully. The same frustrations, dressed up as jokes. The same silences after conversations that ended without resolution. The problem wasn't that we were fighting again. It was that we never actually dealt with why we fought in the first place. The first breakup wasn't an accident. It happened because of fundamental incompatibilities we had been ignoring for years. Different communication styles, different expectations, different ways of handling conflict. None of that disappeared just because we missed each other. When we stopped avoiding those problems, when real life replaced the honeymoon phase, everything fell apart again. And this time, there was no surprise. Just a quiet recognition that we were trying to force something that no longer fit. That realization hurt more than the first breakup. Because the second time, we couldn't pretend it was timing or circumstance. We had proof. We tried again, and the outcome was the same. That's when I learned something important. Not every relationship fails because people gave up too soon. Some relationships fail because certain differences simply don't change, no matter how much affection or history is involved. Giving an ex a second chance doesn't automatically mean growth. Sometimes it just confirms what you already knew but weren't ready to accept. And walking away the second time isn't failure. It's clarity. I was married to my ex-wife for 14 years. 14 years is long enough that a person becomes part of your nervous system. Your routines, your thinking, the way you imagine the future, all of it quietly builds around them. When we divorced, it didn't happen in a dramatic explosion. It happened after years of unresolved problems, especially around her mental health. Not because she didn't care, but because she avoided dealing with it. And I let that avoidance become normal. I told myself love meant patience. In reality, it meant postponing reality. We were apart for 2.5 years. During that time, we barely spoke at first. I needed distance to relearn who I was without her. I dated a little. I worked. I slept better. But even then, Nothing ever fully replaced the feeling that something essential was unfinished. Then, slowly, she changed. Not in the superficial ways people pretend to change. Not promises. Not emotional speeches. Actual work. Therapy. Accountability. Owning her patterns without excuses. She faced the mental health issues she had ignored for years and didn't minimize the damage they caused, to herself or to our marriage. I didn't rush back. I watched. I paid attention to how she handled stress, conflict, disappointment. Whether the growth held up when things weren't easy. Whether she took responsibility without flipping it into guilt or self-pity. She did. What struck me most wasn't how much she wanted me back. It was how little she tried to convince me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. She was showing consistency. That's when I understood something important. The first marriage didn't fail because there was no love. It failed because love alone can't survive untreated problems. 2 weeks from now, we're getting married again. Not because we're nostalgic. Not because we're afraid to be alone. But because we're meeting each other as different people, older, humbler, more honest about our limits. She didn't just come back apologetic. She came back grounded. I don't believe in many absolutes, but I believe this. Second chances only work when the person you return to is no longer the same one you left. She's my person, and this time, we're choosing each other with open eyes. Honestly, I believe everyone deserves a second chance, but not a third. The first time something breaks, it's often messy and impulsive. Someone says the wrong thing, reacts badly, makes a stupid decision in the heat of the moment. We're human. We misjudge, we panic, we act out of fear or insecurity. That first mistake doesn't always define who someone really is. It defines a moment they didn't handle well. That's why a first chance is easy to forgive. You talk it through. You calm down. You decide to move forward because you trust that it wasn't intentional, that it wasn't rooted in disregard or malice. You chalk it up to immaturity, stress, or a bad day, and you keep going. A second chance is different. By the time you reach it, everything is already on the table. The person knows exactly what hurt you. They know the boundary they crossed. They understand the consequences because they've already seen them once. Nothing about the situation is unclear anymore. So when the same line gets crossed again, it isn't accidental. It's a choice. That's what makes the second chance so heavy. It's no longer about ignorance or poor judgment. It's about intent. About deciding that, despite knowing how much it hurt last time, they're willing to risk doing it again. Giving someone a second chance means you're betting on real change. Not apologies. Not promises. Actual behavioral difference. It's you saying, I believe you understand what's at stake now. And sometimes that bet pays off. But if it doesn't, if the same patterns reappear, if the same wounds reopen, then a third chance isn't generosity anymore. It's self-betrayal. At that point, you're not giving them room to grow. You're teaching them that your boundaries aren't real. That no matter how many times they cross the line, you'll keep redrawing it farther back. There's a difference between being compassionate and being available for repeated damage. Second chances are about grace. Third chances are about fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear of admitting that love isn't enough to fix certain behaviors. Learning when to stop forgiving doesn't make you cold. It means you've learned to protect yourself. Everyone deserves the opportunity to make things right. But no one is entitled to unlimited access to you after they've shown you who they are, twice. As someone who has been on both sides of second chances, the one asking for them and the one giving them, I've come to a conclusion I didn't want to accept for a long time. Most of the time, it isn't worth it. When I was given a second chance, I wanted to believe it was about forgiveness, growth, love. But looking back honestly, I can see that it was rarely about those things. It was about familiarity, about comfort, about not wanting to start over. And when I gave second chances, I told myself the same story. I thought I was being understanding, mature, patient. I told myself people just need time to change, that everyone messes up once. That history counts for something. What I didn't want to admit was this. In many cases, the second chance wasn't given because I was truly valued. It was given because I was useful. I filled a role. I provided stability. I made life easier. When someone gives you a second chance because they genuinely can't imagine life without you, that's one thing. But far more often, the reason is simpler and less flattering. They couldn't find anyone else who offered what you did. Not the love, the convenience. They didn't want to lose the emotional support, the routine, the safety net, the way you showed up when things got hard, the way you absorbed their chaos so they didn't have to face it alone. And when you're the one giving the second chance, the logic isn't much better. You don't do it because the issues are resolved. You do it because you're attached to the version of the person you hope they'll become. Because the unknown feels scarier than repeating something that already hurt you. So you compromise with yourself. You lower expectations slightly. You become more cautious. You convince yourself that this time will be different, even though nothing fundamental has changed. That's the quiet tragedy of second chances. They often bring you back into the same relationship, just with less innocence and more restraint. Over time, I realized something uncomfortable. When second chances work, it's not because of the chance itself. It's because something external forced real change. Years apart, therapy, life consequences, true accountability. Without that, a second chance is usually just a pause before the same ending. And when it fails again, it doesn't hurt the same way as the first time. It hurts worse, because this time, you knew better. Now, when I think about second chances, I'm far more skeptical. Not cynical, careful. Because love shouldn't require you to repeatedly prove your worth. And forgiveness shouldn't cost you your self-respect. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for both people, is to let the first ending be the last one. I've been on both sides of this, and I can say without hesitation, giving a second chance can either clarify everything or break you faster than the first ending ever did. I gave one once, believing it meant growth. Believing it meant we had learned something. Believing that the pain we'd already gone through would be enough to stop us from repeating it. It wasn't. Less than 3 months after we got back together, she betrayed me again. Not in a dramatic, shocking way, almost worse than that. In a way that made it clear she hadn't actually changed anything fundamental. The same patterns resurfaced, the same boundaries were crossed, and the same apologies followed. Only this time, there was no confusion. I wasn't blindsided. I saw it for exactly what it was. That second breakup didn't hurt because I lost her. It hurt because I realized I had ignored my own judgment. I had already known, on some level, that we were incompatible where it mattered. I just hoped effort and familiarity would compensate for it. They didn't. They never do. That experience hardened me for a while. It made me skeptical of second chances altogether. It taught me that sometimes people don't betray you once. They reveal a pattern, and you choose whether to stay long enough to see it repeat. But here's the part that complicates things. My most recent ex is different. If I ever ran into her again, if I heard from her unexpectedly, I know myself well enough to admit that I would consider trying again. Not because I'm romanticizing the past, and not because I've forgotten why we ended, but because we didn't break apart out of betrayal, manipulation, or disrespect. We ended because of timing, pressure, poor communication, and yes, mistakes on my side that I didn't fully understand until after it was over. I can look back now and see where I could have done better. Not in a self-blaming way, but honestly. Where I shut down instead of speaking. Where I assumed instead of asking. Where I let stress dictate my reactions. That kind of ending leaves a different scar. It doesn't scream, run. It quietly asks, what if? And that's why I don't believe second chances are universally wrong or universally right. They depend entirely on why the first relationship ended. If the breakup exposed dishonesty, repeated betrayal, or a lack of respect, a second chance usually just speeds up the inevitable. You don't get a new relationship. You get the same one with fewer illusions. But when two people walk away still respecting each other, when the ending isn't poisoned, just unresolved, that's harder to dismiss. Still, I'm not naive anymore. I know that trying again would only make sense if something real had changed. Not feelings, those are easy. I'm talking about behavior, self-awareness, and the ability to handle conflict differently than before. Love alone isn't enough. History isn't enough. Regret isn't enough. A second chance is only meaningful if it's offered to a different version of the person, including yourself. Otherwise, it isn't hope. It's repetition. We gave each other more chances than I can count. Not because things were getting better, but because staying felt easier than leaving. Comfort became the glue. Familiar routines, shared history, the quiet understanding of how to coexist without asking much from each other. From the outside, it probably looked stable. From the inside, it felt like we were slowly turning the volume down on our own lives. For the last few years, there was almost no physical intimacy between us. Not because of one fight or one issue, but because the connection had thinned out over time. Touch became rare. Desire felt distant. We didn't talk about it much, not honestly. We just adapted. Like people do when they don't want to face what something has become. We kept telling ourselves that relationships go through phases. That this was normal. That comfort mattered more than intensity. And maybe that's true, to a point. But what we were doing wasn't choosing calm over passion. We were choosing avoidance over truth. Then I met someone else. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. No secrets. No double life. Just a person who, without trying, made me feel awake again. Present. Seen in a way I hadn't been in years. Conversations flowed effortlessly. I laughed differently. I noticed myself caring, deeply, without forcing it. It scared me how quickly that feeling came back. And that's when I realized something painful. What I felt with this new person wasn't something I had lost. It was something I had been denying myself. That's when I finally ended my relationship for real. Not abruptly, not cruelly, just honestly. Because in truth, it had already been over for a long time. We were just coexisting out of habit. Ending it hurt, but not in the way breakups usually do. It felt more like acknowledging a fact that had been waiting patiently for years. Sometimes, though, my mind goes back to someone else. The first person who ever made me feel truly alive. The first person who showed me what real connection felt like. The one who changed how I understood closeness, presence, and desire. There are moments when I wish she would give me a second chance. Not because I think we'd magically fix everything, but because that connection felt rare. The kind you don't replicate easily. The kind that leaves a permanent reference point inside you. A quiet, this is possible. For a long time, I waited for that chance. Checked messages too often. Read into silence. Held space for something that wasn't coming. And then, gradually, I stopped. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally accepted that waiting was keeping me stuck in the past. That some doors don't reopen, no matter how meaningful what was behind them. Letting go didn't happen all at once. It happened in small decisions. Choosing not to hope. Choosing not to pause my life for a maybe. Choosing to move forward without closure. I still carry the memory of what it felt like to be alive for the first time with someone. I don't think that ever goes away, but it no longer controls me. Sometimes relationships don't end with betrayal or anger. Sometimes they end because comfort quietly replaces connection. And sometimes the hardest part isn't ending things. It's finally accepting that the second chance you were waiting for was never meant to come. That's when you stop waiting and start living again. It really depends on the problem. Not every breakup means the same thing. The real question isn't that something went wrong, but what kind of problem it was. Some issues are difficult but fixable. Things like poor communication, stress, mental health struggles, financial pressure, or outside circumstances. These are often external forces that affect a relationship without defining it. When both people recognize them and take responsibility, change is possible, and a second chance can make sense. Other problems are deeper. Lack of respect, incompatible values, different visions of the future, patterns of avoidance, or emotional immaturity. These aren't temporary obstacles, they're structural. They don't disappear just because people miss each other. The mistake many people make is treating all problems as equal. Missing someone doesn't mean the issue was solvable. Loneliness doesn't mean growth happened. Nostalgia doesn't mean compatibility appeared. A second chance only works when the original problem was clearly understood, openly addressed, and realistically fixable. Not when people hope time will do the work for them. Some relationships end because they were interrupted. Others end because they reached their limit. Knowing the difference matters.